Hello. We'll start.
Hello.
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 Hanji. Hello.
Yes, sir. The voice,
Am I am I
your
audible?
voice is clear, sir. Yes, sir. Your voice is clear, sir.
My voice is clear. Na, to
Hello.
chalo,
Yes.
let's start. Uh, I request if everybody else can mute, please. Yeah. Thank you. Uh, so what we had done in the first session was we had seen what is rock mass. What is intact rock, and uh, mm, uh, and we had discussed discontinuities. Then we had seen that how should we analyze the intact rock, in very brief, and then how should we analyze the discontinuities. Subsequently, we came out with then how do we do the classification of rock mass, and understand its behavior. So, firstly, we discussed about the analytical methods in which we thought that if it is a totally ideal medium, how can we calculate the tangential stresses, right? And then we came on to empirical methods, which are based on case studies like Q, RMR, RSR, and GSI. We came on to the numerical methods, and we came to the observational technique, where you can use any of these methods but still observe how the rock is behaving, and then change the rock support as per the ground. In now, what we after that, towards the end, I also covered, partially, as to what is the best way to tunnel in poor ground conditions, where you should divide the cross sectional area into smaller parts, you know do pre-excavation support like a pipe roof umbrella, or and other grouting systems, and do sequential excavation. Now in this part we'll just cover a very basic about tunnel support systems, so that we understand that the supports that we are trying to give to retain the loss of internal pressure due to excavation, how do these supports work, and what kind of supports can be used in what conditions, right? So I'll go ahead with the tunnel support systems. Primary supports were first developed in 1920, where systematic application of shotcrete and rock bolts was started only in the 1950s. So actually, this art is just about 6 to 7 decades old. Shotcrete helped prevent disintegration of ground, which was a problem with traditional supports. Initially, before shotcrete and these things came up, we used to do timber supports, or just massive steel supports. But now we've started using sprayed concrete and rock bolts. Originally used to be fixed as single, but soon systematic bolting came into place. Systematic nothing but doing a series of rock bolts in such a fashion to them, then the grout curtain tends to, interact with each other. You know, covers. Every rock bolt will have a small arch, and that arch will have an interaction with the arch of the adjacent rock bolt, and a kind of a complete false arch is made on top of the underground opening, so that it can be given strength. First application of systematic rock bolt and shotcrete supports was done in Venezuela by Mr. Rapsavich, who's a senior scientist, and he's the one who's the father of new Austrian tunneling method, or observational way of tunneling. Right? The systems are either dried shotcrete, which is used when surface is wet. You need not have the shotcrete be wet, and you can reduce the water, and dry spray can be done on a wet surface. And then there is, shotcrete, which is got steel fiber reinforcements, or we nowadays we also have poly based polymer based reinforcement available, which give you multi-dimensional tensile. you know we can, in case it is normal grouting, use ordinary Portland cement, but in poor ground conditions where we need quick strength, we can use microfine cement with accelerators. Steel supports are basically passive supports, which could be in forms of lattice girders and in forms of ribs. So basically, where we are not expecting too much of load, and we have not done too much of a characterization of rock, that is where we use the steel ribs. The other place you use steel ribs is when you start a portal or you start from one end. So in order to gain that initial template, steel ribs are used. And lattice girders are again used in poor rock conditions. But in countries like Europe, what they do is they use lattice girders in every, because that gives a very good template for drilling and blasting, and you don't have the problems of too much of overbreak because the lattice girder gives a good template. See, what is important to understand is that steel ribs are passive supports, which will get loaded only after the convergence has happened. But and rock bolts are active supports, which actually improve the ground's strength, which leads to strength of the rock mass and hence lesser convergences. Right now, there are certain sliding steel supports also where we are expecting convergences. So what we do is we do this sliding kind of a, we can provide a sliding kind of a mechanism so that these steel supports also slide in. Otherwise, what will happen is these ribs and girders that we put, they tend to get bent. Now, rock bolts per se now are the most important elements which give support to an underground opening. These rock bolts actually will cater to 80% of the strength, 80% of the strength of the complete primary support system. The lattice girders or the spray only gives 20% strength. Sprayed concrete with wire mesh and lattice so that the people who are working in the don't have debris falling on them though after the blasting, and to give that initial support. The main support is given by rock bolts themselves. And rock bolts tend to give support to the system by three. One is by hanging. If you see in the sketch on top left, in the hanging mechanism, what these rock bolts are doing is when you the rock bolts inside, the rock bolts go into good rock, and from there they give anchorage to your tunnel surface, right? And uh, the other aspect is similarly, which is nailing, where if you see in the figure which is on your top right, those dotted green lines are the rock strata. So the rock bolts go from one fault plane into the other fault plane and they stitch or nail them all together. So this stitching action is done by rock bolts. Now, when we were talking about faults, it was very important to see where the orientation of the fault. This condition, top right, if the rock bolts were on the opposite side, so actually they would be almost parallel to fault planes and they would not do any nailing or stitching. So it's very important for us to see on sites as to how the fault planes are oriented, and a rock bolt should go across the planes so that they stitch these beds and give us strength. The other action is again B, where in case of a horizontal rock layer, we put rock bolts and four layers get stitched together and they become a monolithic kind of a mass and they can give strength. Then is what I was telling you about continuous, you know, rock bolting. In this, what you see is that rock bolts are put all around on the periphery, and each rock bolt, when it is grouted, makes a kind of an arch on top, and these arches start to interact with each other. So, in a way, we have got a kind of a false arch which is formed on top, and this false arch gives strength to our underground opening, which is below this arch. So, these are the ways that rock bolts act. Now, depending on how good a ground is, if it is only blocky uh, rock mass where you are only supposed to together, then depending on the orientation of the fault planes, we should use the hanging and the nailing action. But in poor rock mass where there is also water flowing, then this arch-like action can be used by using grouted rock bolts. So that grout is inserted into the mass becomes stronger, and we have a kind of a false arch forming on top underground opening, and that arch gives strength to our section to our opening. See, types of rock bolts. Rock bolting is basically done to reinforce ground so that it can take circumferential stress and prevent rock movement, okay, and thus retain strength of the rock mass. Now, there are various types of rock bolts. The older ones were the mechanically anchored rock bolts, which can be of 4 to 12 meters uh, in length. What they do is you just insert. So in that SN type of bolting, what we used to do is we used to first do a hole, then insert this rock bolt inside, and there would be expansion shell in the end. That expansion shell would expand and hold it to at the tip in good rock. Then the base plate would be tightened behind it. So there is some kind of a pre-stressing, and that gives strength to that complete area. So these were those mechanically anchored rock. Today there are self-drilling anchors which are grouted. So what happens is they have a drill tip drill bit on the top themselves. You just drill them in with your boomers and all, and then they have an annular grab which grouting is done. So the grout goes, oh, it goes in that gap, the drill hole which is goes on the tip, and it gives this rock bolt and friction all along its length, giving it much more strength. So these are the kind of rock bolts which give you maximum strength. The self-drilling grouted rock bolts. Then there are obviously grouted cable bolts in case you are doing caverns and all, where the dimensions are very high and also the parent rock or good elastic rock is very far. You do cable anchoring where you can go up to 20 to 30 meters length and then have a grouted end of the cable, and from there you do pre-stressing of these strands so that you get strength in the mass. Friction rock bolts or Swellex is also a very peculiar rock bolt, in which what happens is you insert the rock bolt and then you gently put water, and this expands. It expands it due to its friction. It holds the rock around. So the good thing about this rock bolt is that it will give you immediate strength. So generally, what should be done in tunneling is that when you are working, there is too much where deformations are coming even after the first blast, we should immediately put anchors on the crown and on the springing levels. When this happens, it gives frictional strength, which is immediate strength. So the initial deformations can be controlled by this. So generally in Rotang Tunnel also, when we were having zones which were under 2 kilometers of overburden, there were a lot of stresses. We used to immediately do this pot bolting using Swellex bolts. So we would put a bolt inside, swell it, and with its friction, it would hold the rock together. So it would give us that initial kind of a breather before our main grouted rock bolts would come behind. So this is an important rock bolt for immediate strength. Though it is giving you strength based only on overall strength is not at par with the grouted rock bolt. Right? So friction anchored was similar. You see in the installation of a Swellex is like this. So you drill the hole, you install a black section and add the middle sections if you length, and then with a water pump you swell it. So if you see on the rightmost figure, it swells up and it gives skin friction all around. And because of that friction, it holds that rock. And subsequently, they should always be coupled with grouted rock bolts. One more, kind of a rock thing. I told you about monitoring, where we keep looking as to how much is the rock deforming. If the rock deforms too much, that means we have to give extra supports. So this rock bolt, what it has it on its end, it has a green, yellow, and a red tip. So you put this rock bolt inside. After the deformations occur, obviously the rock will get pushed outside, because of which, you will only start seeing the yellow and the red, and subsequently the red. When you see this, you understand that so much of deformation has occurred that it has got you in the red zone or in the danger zone, and more rock bolts should be put. So this is another tool for monitoring. Expensive rock bolts, but they're available in Europe. They can be used one odd rock bolt in 5-6, but it gives you an idea if these rock bolts in case there is too much of deformation, and you should increase the number of supports out there in that area. you, know, you see, this is you would have already been doing bolt using 2-arm or 3-arm boomers. What is important that we should do the installation in such a fashion that bolts hang or stitch the rock properly. And wherever there is water and poor mass, we must do grouting so that a complete grout curtain is formed on top and we get stability. So I was talking about systematic bolting. If you see systematic bolting on this figure, you see on the right side that as you do the bolts and you do the grout, this grout actually is making a complete arch all around. So this is systematic bolting, and this will help you ensure that you have a solid uh, engineered mass above your opening, and and because of that arch action, you will not have much stresses on the boundary of the tunnel or whatever is the underground opening. In systematic bolting, it is generally done like this, where bolts are put everywhere and then grouted. Right now, there is something called the controller as well. So these are nothing but heavy elements which are put between your shotcrete. So in that figure that I showed you about in system behavior, you would have seen that very good rock under very high stresses. So good rock under say 1.5 or 2 kilometers then will have very high potential energy. Because it has potential energy, it tends to compress the rock, and the rock breaks in, because of the tensile action, it breaks and starts shooting like pellets. Now, in order to absorb this energy, we can put these lining stress controllers. So in very good rock under high overburden, where rock spalling or rock bursting is expected, these lining stress controllers can be put you know along the tunnel length at 2 or 3 places, in such zones, so that they can absorb. They are spring like elements, they can absorb some of the energy, and that rock burst can be prevented, because it can really be harmful and it can hurt people on the side. We also spoke about pre-excavation supports or pipe roof, right? So one of the best pre-excavation supports is pipe roof. Now what you are seeing in the figure is these are series of umbrellas. So what you do is you use a 15-meter long pipe, generally 76 to 114 diameter, which is put along the tunnel length. What you see in the picture below, along the tunnel length, you drill them at an angle of 5 to 7 degrees. So a complete pipe roof is put. So there will be, say, 150 to 200 pipes all along your arch, you know, inclined at 5 to 7 degrees, grouted with microfine cement, or some extra steel is sometimes added inside the pipes. And this pipe roof has now made a complete arch. After that, one starts excavating under this arch, this pipe roof arch. And once you reach 12 meters, you put another pipe roof. And and then again 12 meters and you put another pipe roof. So there are these successive pipe roofs. Now, in Rohtang tunnel, where we had a 600 meters shear zone, 450 meters of the shear zone was covered with such pipe roofs. Sometimes they were spaced out, sometimes they were double layer pipe roofs of 114 dia with microfine cement and with extra steel also to give us that kind of a strength, so that we could excavate under it. So this is also an important uh, mm, support system. It's a pre-excavation support. The alternative to pre-excavation support is also grouting systems. I am purposely not touching grouting. Tomorrow we are covering grouting in detail, injection grouting with the speaker. So the current trends now have have changed the way tunneling happens. Americans started tunneling with just steel sets, passive spots, but now observational techniques have come into play where people want to observe as to how much is the deformation, and then based on those observations, do we actually end up putting the supports. So we are optimizing. So improved materials and improved technology has led to higher quality tunnels where they are safer and also they are cheaper. Improvement in monitoring, data processing, and evaluation of results has ensured that there are no surprises. Now, today, what can happen is if we keep continuously monitoring, then even if there is a fault line or fault coming ahead of our face, our targets, those 3D deformation targets, will start showing some kind of deformation because there is a softer strata ahead. And with that, we can predict that we need to improve our or increase our supports. And then there are lesser chances of failures and surprises. Cost of tunnel construction is also considerably reduced where observational techniques are being used, because we are putting the supports, only the support which is required. and not what is there written in the contract or what is there. We actually put a support today as per what needs. So where there is very good rock and there is no support required, support. Otherwise, we'll only make the practice more. Now, accidents due to instability are practically zero. Doing internationally, people are doing very good monitoring. Better equipment has reduced the number of required miners. Obviously, now that drilling operations, grouting, these operations have become mechanized. So, 5 people on a face is a very good crew. What I observed in Europe was that there were only these 6-7 people who would do the drilling, the charging, take the blast, and these 7 people would actually then come in with the mining dumpers, do the muck, and come back for the blast again. So these 6 to 7 people would control the complete cycle, and they would be given bonus uh, when they would do more blasts than what was planned. So practically, what these people are the pivot which these the tunnel cycles are running there, and they're very good. Numerical simulation now highly evolved. So once you have good data about the rock through your exploration and investigation programs, one can now simulate the behavior in advance and design in a proper fashion so that even before the project start, it kind of supports with you on the sides. We finished with tunnel support systems. Now, what I'll do after this is I'll cover for all of you uh, a, a small case study on Rotang Tunnel where we got into a shear zone and what was done there, just to give you an understanding as to how these things can be improved, right? Or implemented rather. Is this visible on the screen?
Yes, sir. It is visible.
Perfect. All right then. Tell you briefly about the tunnel. Basically, on the Manali Leh axis today, there are on the existing highway there was Rotang Pass, then Baralachla, Lachungla, Tanglangla, right? These 4 passes were there. So Rotang was first of these passes, and that's why government decided that we should do this tunnel first. Now this tunnel basically passes from people who are aware. There's an area called Palchan, from where you come into the Solang Valley. It goes through the underbelly of Rotang Pass and comes out at Sisu. So the complete the Rotang Pass is avoided. The tunnel is at 10,000 feet and Rotang Pass is almost at about 15,000 feet. So we at 10,000 feet and cutting down the distance by 46. The maximum overburden on this tunnel at some places was about 1,900 meters. So at the base of the tunnel, it was, where excavation was carried out, it came out to be effectively 2 kilometers. The project was being done by Border Roads Organization, where there was a chief engineer of Border Roads sitting in Solang Valley. We had contractors who were AFCONs, and we had an engineer team in international D2 on a joint venture with PEMS and ICT, and we had a designer SMEC because this was a FIDIC Red Book system. The tunnel finally came out to be 9.02 kilometers, and both the south and the north portal was almost at about 30,000 at about 10,000 feet above this thing. I'll not cover on this part. I'll just cover a few things just so that you get an idea. Now, what you are seeing on your screen is the cross section. Now here, this was very unique in the fashion that the escape tube was built within the main tube. So what the rectangular portion you have below is emergency escape tunnel. This ET, since it was built into the main cross section itself, this made the Rotang tunnel a very huge cross section. So we had poor rock. Then on top of that, we had such a big cross section because there was semi-transverse ventilation. We had to give a ventilation slab, and we had a escape tunnel below. So in three tiers: the ventilation tier, the main carriageway tier, and the escape tier. And in even poor rock conditions, but because this became fully circular, so this making this tunnel extremely challenging. Every 500 meters we had a kind of a access cuddy to come onto that emergency egress duct, right? Overburden varied from right up to just about 150 meters to 1900 meters. The basic area it was also in the middle crystalline zone of the Himalayas. We had phyllites, quartzites, migmatites and schists. So we were very happy when we got quartzite, but most of the rock was schist and phyllite, which was very poor rock. And at each cross section now we would have schist, quartzite, migmatite, quartzite. So there would be this kind of stratification. So very difficult to simulate or understand its behavior. This changing. So it was very important for us to pick up the monitor so that we understand as to how our tunnel was actually behaving. You know, Peculiarities being that very high overburden, we are going through a crystalline thrust. There is varying geology from predicted and predicted rock mass. One of the biggest cross sections due to the escape inside, and there was inevitable snow also on both ends during the working time. you know but we were working with a FIDIC thing, which was good. Here what we had was, in the design details, we had rock mass based on Q system. So if you see, our design matrix was based on overburden and Q values. So actually in the tender there were drawings given for Q determined at the face and overburden, but on site we realized that a lot of times these things were not actually what the tunnel required, and we ended up using monitoring techniques to see how the deformation is happening, then decide where and how many rock bolts should we put, and what kind of support should we put at any given. Should we go for sequential excavation in poor rock mass, or can we go for full face heading? So we finally did not use so much of this design metrics. We used it only for guidance, and then we evolved our own system, the monitoring deformation data that we got on the site. This had rock supports from using rock balls, pipe roofs, uh, things like that. Was done in stages. There would be heading, benching, and then the drainage work and the egress tunnel would come up, and after that the final lining would come up. You see on your pictures is it's a huge cross section to work with. On the top left, you see a picture of when we were inside a Serinala. The arch lining was a 550 arch lining, about 150 to 170 cubic meters of concrete for every 12-meter section. There was a ventilation slab, a ventilation section of about 2.6 meters above that, because it was a 9-kilometer long tunnel without any adits or shafts. And we had to ensure that fresh air is available to all the commuters. So we had a huge cross section required for ventilation. The emergency egress elements which were put inside the excavation was done, these were lifted and put inside. I'll skip this part of our special equipment and all. You know, I'll come to the challenges. Now, this is a very, what you see in this graph is, on the left side you have progress, and on y-axis, on the x-axis, you have the. So if you see, when we started the tunneling, we were making good progress, always upwards of 70, 80 meters, going up to 207 meters. Then all of a sudden in December 2011, it comes down to 37 meters, and then it goes down to months where there was no progress at all. And this continued for 4 years, from December 2011 to December 2015, where we took 4 years to excavate 587 meters. And you would not believe that this 587 meters of shear zone took us 4 years. And the balance almost 8.5 kilometers of the tunnel also took us 4 years. This is what poor geology can do, to a tunnel. So what was it? It was basically that the tunnel was passing underneath a nala. It is not that the nala was crossing the tunnel cross section. The nala was still about 300-400 meters below. But this nala, basically what it has is a mm, is a fault. So this fault here, fault plane was known to us in the DPR stage, but we did not expect it to be as deep, or we did not expect it to have so much of interaction with the tunnel which was passing below this nala about 300 to 400 meters below. And that is what surprised us on the site when for the first time the muck flows came in. You know, if you see how the tunnel was situated, this is a section, a cross section, which is showing you that the tunnel is on the top right bottom, and the nala is somewhere above it. But because of the particular orientation of the fault planes, all these faults were charged with water, and this water would flow into the tunnel when we were excavating it. We had a series of muck flows. What is that we had to there was so much of muck flow from the face itself that we had to make a kind of a dam, to a temporary coffer kind of a dam to stop that muck flow. And even that collapsed, and we had the muck flowing all over from the tunnel and coming into the tunnel. We faced numerous of such muck flows, major ones, and at times we also had to suspend 15 days to find out ways how as to how to approach this kind of geology. A lot of measures were initiated. We tried chemical grouting, we tried doing the pilot tunnel, we did micropiling. The chemical grouting, because the mass was so porous, the grout would actually flow out and get into the nala and go beyond from there. The pilot tunnel, when we did it for the first time, the pilot tunnel started collecting all the water, and that also subsequently collapsed. Micropiling, because it was piling at the springing level, helped a bit but not much. At one point we had so much of deformation that we had to suspend work, and no workers wanted to get into the tunnel anymore. 2 meters of deformation happened. It is then that we decided that we should start doing sequential excavation. So we tried a side drift to divide it into half. But side drift also collapsed. We tried to put props and all on the other side, but that also didn't help us. People from NIRM, Wadia Institute even gave us suggestions, but none of them were enough for the site that we were on. Finally, these kind of muck flows were coming from the face. I was telling you about the pilot tunnel. Pilot tunnel itself started catching all the water, and the complete tunnel behind got inundated. Here you see in real time, in 30 seconds, there's so much of muck that it almost traps the boomer. So these were the kind of muck flows we were facing, and at this time somebody suggested that should we divert the tunnel. Thankfully, by this time we were sure that if we do proper sequential excavation under pipe roofs and all, we will still be able to go through. And had we diverted the tunnel and kink in the tunnel, it would have been a ventilation nightmare, because this was a traffic tunnel and vehicles were supposed to go in. It would be very difficult to ventilate a tunnel which would have such a turn inside. And just to see as to how far we were, what it was, went on top. We did a kind of an outcrop analysis to see as to when from this right hand side hill we will get into the left hand side hill and we will actually cross the nala. and we did a prediction that we were just about 200, 250 meters, 3 meters, 300 meters away that time. And we, organization as Border Roads organization, persevered that we will not change the alignment and we will still go straight. We did an analysis that another few meters we will get better rock, and then we also did face drilling to keep checking our assumptions if the rock was improving ahead to help us. And finally, it was at after about 580 meters that we started finding rock ahead. And how we did this what I had discussed earlier. We did a pipe roof with a core, so we did double layer pipe roofs in very poor ground. We did a support core behind that. We did sequential meter by meter excavation, you know, and we also did a temporary invert. Now, why this temporary invert was done was this green thing, because it completes the ring. So if we want to compare it to a foundation, we know that when we do a foundation work, there is a punching shear and there is heaving on the sides. So on the tunnels also there is heaving on both sides. The tunnel floor will tend to heave from both sides because it is akin to that foundation heaving. So if you do a circular section, then those tensile stresses are not formed and they become compressive. That's why in the Serinala portion, we did a complete deep invert where the complete tunnel was made circular. And that's how, from December 2011, you see on the top left to December 2015, we reached a part where we started touching the rock again without changing the alignment. And this was done under pipe roofs. And sometimes when of water to control the water, and we kept the water to one or the other side to be able to do. You see, the difference is such that 580 meters in 4 years, and we did 1800 meters in that. And then all of you are subsequently inaugurated in October last year. But what we've done here now throughout is that we've used a geotextile and and a waterproofing membrane to waterproof the complete tunnel, so that the water comes to the bottom drains and can be drained out of the tunnel. We use dimple membranes, we use Nylix strips at very close spacing so that the water can be uh, mm, mm, captured behind the final lining and can be diverted into the main drain and then towards the portals. Right. Again, North Portal, generally in the winters we could not work because Rotang Pass was closed for 6 months. But the only one thing event we had was a kind of a rock burst, which was because I told you good rock on that side but very high overburden. And it's not that we could not have see on these graphs these deformations we were seeing. Somehow our people on the site were overconfident would seize and it would not break, and all we had a rock burst. Thankfully, it was on a lunch break and nobody got hurt. Subsequently, we put these lining stress controllers. You know, in this is not squeezing around condition. This is actually rock. We put the lining stress controller to control those stresses. Right. The obviously high stresses due to overburden, very high temperature. We also that the gradient of the Earth is about 27 degrees a kilometer. So where we were about 1.52 kilometers below, the temperature was about, you would not believe that before the breakthrough, we did breakthrough 5 kilometers inside from South Portal, temperatures would start touching 50 to 53 degrees, and we had to rotate labor every 2-3 hours because they could not sustain in such temperature. Ventilation, 5 kilometers inside the portals. During work also we had to do so much of ventilation, we had to use so much of electricity. Sometimes this electricity was more than what was being used in Manali. Mud disposal again becomes challenging because as you go inside, the lead is prediction of deformation at each excavation step. So it was very important that we as clients, our designers, our contractors, everybody understood the observation so that we could do the right kind of support systems. Otherwise, anybody would have lack of understanding, it would be very difficult to decide the supports. Alignment. Since this has only two portals, north and south, and they can be traversed only through Rotang Pass, what we did for every 1 kilometer, we got a gyroscopic inertial survey. We did it to ensure, you know, uh, corrections are done because we understand that is finally a magnetic equipment. Because of all the tunnels, there are induced errors in that system. to be able to correct those errors, you need to do a non-magnetic survey, which is an inertial survey. So every 1 kilometer, we did an inertial survey, and finally, when we did the breakthrough, we were within 3 centimeters of the desired place. So that was the accuracy that we had of these survey systems there. Material requirement for concrete structures, because rock was not always suitable. Huge amount of concrete has to go into tunnels and all. So that itself was a challenge. Plus, we were concreting in the winters, so we had to ensure we are heating aggregate, and we had all our conveys were covered all the time. We had winter challenges in form of such snow. Our batching plants and all would get buried under the snow. Plus, because we were on the access to Manali, the traffic challenges were also there. Yeah? So I'll not go on to the contract. It would to our lines for questions. Our basically same basic rock mechanics, excavation, support sequence, and opening size is important. Had we done those pipe roofs from the very beginning, probably out of the 4 years, we could have saved 1 year. You know, but because people kept graduating the response, it took us a lot of time. So, correct approach. Then investigation is very important. And one thing is important, that where long tunnels, there should be an adit or a shaft, so that it can give you multiple attack points. In case you would get stuck at any zone, you can at least start working from the other side. Characterization, I've always said discontinue empirical methods, evolve on, because these empirical methods come from other countries, come from other case studies. So you can use them preliminarily, but subsequently monitoring would be very important to ensure that we put the support that is required, and not what is there in a chart, which might not be at, in sync with the ground that we are actually experiencing. Very important. We must understand that for all tunneling firms, very huge overhead. So if they are not getting progress because it's weak, then most of the time away. So it's important for us to understand that there is an overhead cost per day being borne by the contractor if he stays on site, and if geology is not helping, having to bear the overhead cost, there should be a way in contracts him that overburden, that overhead cost. Otherwise, any tunneling work where there is poor geology, it would not be feasible for people to do the feasible for the contractors to continue. EOQ breakup for arriving at fresh items. What happens in tunnels is, because when you're tunneling, you sometimes uh, get get into zones or get into areas where new items have to be introduced. Now, new items, it's okay, you can do a market survey, you can do the application cost also, but the overheads, if they are known, only then can you add those overheads and all and come on to the cost. Then requirement of tech expertise and contractual flexibility. I would always advise that wherever, you know if our team, our own client team is, there's nothing wrong in having an expert who is there to advise the client and to do these site meetings, so that the right approach can be taken to dispute resolution mechanisms and expertise is extremely important, because most of these projects get stalled more because of contractual issues and less because of technical issues. you know Data sharing, this is something I've believed. We were doing this Rotang tunnel, and very close to us was AD Hydro, which was done a few years ago. And we did not even pick up their face logs to see. So I would always suggest that whenever we do tunneling, we maintain proper face logs, and within the fraternity who's working on tunnels and such structures, we should share this data, so that if somebody comes up and does work in that general area, at least they have some kind of a reference geology available. Then for, especially for tunnels like Rotang, it is important that we have, creatively we use, now that mapping yard is being developed as a tourist spot. So it's important that from the beginning you decide as to what has to be done with the muck, so that that muck becomes usable in the end to the community. Yes, I finished this thing. And I think now we can do the question answer session. Do we have the organizer here?
Yes, sir.
So I think now what we can do is we can probably do the question answer session, or if there is anything else that people think that I need to repeat or do it again, I could do that again.
Okay, sir.
Yep.
Now we open for question and answer. If anyone have any question, any query, they may ask.
Sir,
Hanji, yes.
what was the vertical cover when their rock busting was taking place?
Almost 1400 meters.
1400 meters.
Yes.
And
And
sir,
was
what was
quartzitic.
the,
Quartzitic.
what was the strength of the rock mass, sir?
It was quartzitic rock, so uniaxial strength would go up to about 80 to 120 MPa.
In wet,
Thankfully we had
in saturated
we had some
condition.
no, they were unsaturated, absolutely dry rock. Thankfully, there was some shear seam
Mhm.
because of which the photo I showed you, it did not spoil as it actually
Mhm.
started bursting. Then that shear seam failed, and it became a shear failure after
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
So it was a mix of a rock bursting and a shear failure.
Mhm.
Sir,
Thank you.
sir, sir,
Yes, yes, please.
yes. I want to ask how we can predict rock bursting.
See, the concept of rock bursting is clear. It has to be good intact rock, matlab any rock which is likely to have uniaxial compressive strength of more than 80 MPa, and if the overburden is about more than a kilometer, you should expect rock bursting in this area. And what happens is it
Yes.
will the moment you get into that zone and when you are drilling, when you start drilling on the face itself, on the
Yes.
face during drilling also these small tension start coming, so you can make out from those tension cracks now the potential energy is very high, and because it is good rock, it's not squeezing but it is bulging, and it is kind of a tensile failure. So your drillers should be able to tell you from the face itself. But generally
So
in the profile where we are under more than a kilometer of overburden, and if the rock mass is really good and dry, we should expect rock mass and we should start reading the face.
okay, sir.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions, please?
Sir, what is the difference between rock bolting and rock anchoring?
Actually, it's the same thing. See, there are soil bolts, rock bolts, soil nails. Finally, what we are doing is those four actions. Either we are trying to nail the rock, get into a beam action together, or we are trying to hang the rock from some. Hi.
Do we still have more questions, please?
Yeah. So in case in a cable anchor, these strands, number of strands are decided upon the strength which is required, and it will go through a medium get into the end into good rock, and there would be a grouted length, and then there would be free length, and then there would be tensioning done at the end on the open
Yes.
end to in order to do a pre-tension this thing so that strength can be given to that medium. So cable anchoring is generally the right term to use. Rock bolts or rock anchoring is the same. As I said, important to know there are friction bolts and there are grouted rock bolts. Friction bolts or Swellex will only have frictional strength. Grouted rock bolts will have frictional strength as well as cohesive strength because the grout is going all over around that sleeve. Friction bolts give us immediate strength but less strength. Grouted rock bolts will give us strength after about 5-6 hours, but they will give us more strength.
Okay, sir.
Yes.
Do we have more queries?
Excuse me.
Yes, please.
I want to ask how SFRS how much SFRS will improve the support system, and when it
See,
has
as
to be
I said,
given and how much.
as I said, steel fiber reinforced shotcrete or polyfiber reinforced shotcrete, whatever you use finally ends up giving you about 20% of the total strength that you require. Because see, shotcrete, what it is doing is it is giving you a protection film from the small pieces of rocks which are there. So when we generally use steel fiber reinforced concrete is when we think that there are going to be quick deformations, and it is likely that the shotcrete shell will crack and it will fall. So this method actually would be to use SFRS or plain shotcrete with wire mesh, so that even if there is deformation and it sags, so these blocks don't fall on people working. So I would always advise that even if you are not using SFRS and you are using just plain shotcrete, use a wire mesh. Wire mesh gives a lot of protection to our working crews.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, in case there are not many questions, there's one more interesting thing that I would like to tell you, tell all of you, since you're all in the field, which is very important, is which is about having what should I say? Uh, what should you do when you are making a DPR, right? Now in DPRs, what happens is it's very important to understand the process. So you have to do this characterization. So first of all, what you should do is when a DPR consultant comes to you and he's given you the QAP, you should tell him that he should give you the the bibliographical studies, what he has got from the books and the geological maps which are already published. Based on that, their geologists should do a walkover survey where they do an outcrop analysis, and they should now start building up that 3D model of the rock from where you are going to do your underground structure. Subsequently, you should initially do some boreholes, which are exploratory boreholes. You should try and get to the tunnel surface as much as possible, but sometimes due to very high overburden, you might not be able to go there. After doing some exploratory boreholes, one should do the geophysical surveys. Because the geophysical surveys will give you the idea about the gaps between the boreholes. And once that is done, after that, you do some other confirmatory boreholes again, because some gaps will come up in your information after you do the geophysics. So it's important that this model is developed in such a fashion that first it is based on the maps, then on the geologist's walkover survey, then populated by exploratory boreholes, then geophysical surveys, and subsequently more boreholes which give you more data. So that before we start tunneling, we have confidence about the rock that we are going to encounter. Though there will still be changes, But still we will have some idea about the rock. What happens because of this is that since you've done a good analysis of the rock, and you have got a good model, a geological model, and this becomes part of the DPR, then the contractors who are bidding for your contracts, they will be much more confident because they see that there is good data available, and they will give you the right price. Otherwise, what will happen is when they see that the data is shaky, so they will always load a lot of risk in the contract. So generally the bidding will go for higher cost, and there is a very catch 22 kind of a situation in this kind of a situation where what happens is now contractors know the DPR is not very good. They should load more risk into this bid, but they know there is competition also, so they don't load too much of risk. So instead of 20% risk, he only puts 5% risk. But when he starts working, but he gets surprised and poor rock comes. So after a while he can't sustain it because his bid has not catered for this poor rock, you know, and then he will have no option but to run away till the time your contract is a BOQ based contract and you have contractual flexibility where you help him and you tell him that okay, in the DPR the rock was shown to be better, now it is poor. We understand you have to put in more effort, you have to have more overburden overhead costs. We will be ready to pay you. So today, if all of you are in the field of tunneling and underground structures, I would request all of you to also read up about the Emerald book, where they have done this kind of a balancing out, where there are time related costs to the contract, and then there are BOQ costs as per the actual requirement of the supports. So it's a good balance, in our lump sum kind of contracting. Either the contractor has to end up doing shoddy work, or in many times they leave site and then we get into contractual issues and arbitration and things like that. So it's very important that we concentrate during the DPR stage. So anyone who's handling DPRs and all should make it a point that your consultants keep briefing you about how they are doing it, how they are developing the geological model, where all are they doing the boreholes, what is the output, what are the samples they are getting from those boreholes, what kind of a model and behavior system do they expect, what kind of reports do they expect, so that when you do the valuation, uh, is proper. Yeah. Anything else?
Excuse me. Hello.
Yes, please.
Sir, I wanted to ask you, as far as tunneling is concerned, when we are moving into good rock mass, we usually tend to be greedy in terms of having progress. But at some point of time, suppose we are expected to have poor rock masses in a phase ahead, for which geology has predicted something. But we are progressing as in terms of actual numbers. So, what are the signs which we have to look in for just to have a word of caution in progress in making the progress of the tunnel?
See what happens is that if you are doing your 3D monitoring and you have 5 targets, so say you are going to get a shear zone on the right of the tunnel, automatically the target on the right, even before the shear zone comes onto the face, है ना, comes onto the face, you will start seeing that there is deformation there. So one can predict that all of a sudden there is more deformation on the right side. That means the shear zone is coming. Slowly, that poor rock will start showing on the excavation face also. It will not come in one go on the face. It will come from, probably one side, and then it will start covering the whole face later. So we need to, at every blast that we take in the tunnel or every round of tunneling, we need to do that face logging properly. We need to keep understanding how the face is changing and also corroborate it with the deformations we are getting from the targets. in a good tunnel, even in good rock, we should have at least 2 deformation readings in a day. So that
Okay.
we know, okay, this deformation is increasing at this side, probably poor rock is coming, and the geologist is also seeing it on the face, and he says, yes, I think poor rock is coming from the right, and now that we are progressing into this area, we are going to get poor rock on our face, and we must now, from that point onwards, you should start increasing your rock bolts.
Okay. And one last thing, sir. For a particular case, when a project is abandoned for a long time and you have to restart the work after a gap of 5 to 10 years in the tunneling, what precautions you would take to save human lives in progressing ahead?
Firstly, what I would want is anyone who has to close a project should ensure that at least, if nothing else, they should leave tape extensometers inside, so that if there are some deformations which have happened over the years, somebody can see them. But what one should do is, before restarting work, see, the most unstable part is the part which is just about 30-40 meters from the face, right? 3-4 times the diameter. Okay. Because the other part behind it has already seen its worst condition. So what happens is, the most dynamic or the moving part is close to the face. If I would to restart, what I would do is, wherever the excavation is reached about 3 to 4 diameters before it, I would actually first put additional support systems, some extra support systems, and then start excavating the face again. Because this particular portion is likely to see movement the moment the face starts again. And whatever is even behind that has already, I think, seen its worst. So if it's not collapsed in those 5 years, nothing.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
That would be my take. You're welcome.
Do we still have more questions?
Yes, madam. Good afternoon, sir. Hello.
Yes.
Sir, am I audible?
Good afternoon.
Sir, myself, Vinod Kumar. Sir, myself, Vinod Kumar, Senior Manager Geology. I am speaking from Sikkim. Actually, sir, I am in Tista 6 project. Basically, sir, two parallel tunnels. Sir, I have a problem. I would like to share with you, and I would like to have a solution from you. Actually, sir, there are two parallel tunnels of diameter 9.8 meter finished and having length almost 13.75 kilometer each. Means total length of tunnel is almost 27 kilometer, and that is being constructed in Tista 6 project. And actually, in 2015, one of our phase that was collapsed, and presently that is supported with muck. And what we have done intensive and extensive consolidation grouting almost 25 meter behind the face. And after doing consolidation grouting, and sir, after doing consolidation grouting behind the face, and we have also done pipe roofing, short cutting, and after doing short coating, the pipe roofing and consolidation grouting, we have erected 4 numbers of steel ribs in segment, that is from SPL to crown portion in left left side, and also in right side from SPL to crown portion. Problem is that actually the super incumbent cover at that location, that is only 100 meter. Out of that, 50 meter is only rock. And second thing is, our rock is philitic, the quartzitic phyllite with bands of philitic quartzite. Since there is a poor to very poor rock mass condition, and there is a nala which is flowing above the our tunnel, and there is actually, sir, we have after installation of ribs. Problem is that if we remove the muck from the invert, then that portion will be collapsed. That will become unstable in that situation. And since there is and since there is incessant discharge of water, that's why there is no use of doing consolidation grouting at face. In such a
Absolutely.
scenario, we are helpless to go ahead, because if we remove the muck from inward portion, in that situation there will be instability. There is apprehension of instability. That's why we cannot remove the muck. And in order to consolidate the muck, in order to consolidate the rock mass ahead of the face, we are doing consolidation grouting, but due to discharge of the water, we are unable to tacking. The mass is not getting consolidated unless and until there is a stoppage of the discharge of water. So, sir, in such a scenario, what would you suggest? What should we do?
See, definitely consolidation grouting will not help, because I'm sure that, with flowing water, the grout must not be holding it all.
Definitely.
The mass keeps changing. And you were saying you are under 100 meters of overburden, and that also mixed quartzitic phyllite is there. And with water, I'm sure that is also becoming like paste.
Definitely.
Almost becoming like paste. So, now we have to do a rigid system. The best way to do, if it was possible in such a system, was to do a pipe jacking or something. I understand at that location, pipe jacking is nearly impossible to get there. But what we can
Pardon, sir?
probably try is
Pipe?
pipe jacking.
Okay,
Pipe
sir.
jacking.
Pipe. Ji.
Yeah. So here what happens is that you have these pipe sections with jacks, they're pushed. So they're almost like, built tunnels, and they're pushed inside, and then you work under that later. That kind of a thing. But because it will then, at least be able to hold the mass on top. But I don't know, I've been in Chungthang and Lachin for 2.5-3 years. I understand those areas well. It's difficult to get this kind of equipment there. Uh, that's one. But what can probably be done is, like you say, that if you remove the muck from the invert, there would be collapses. What you should try is that probably just for about a meter, if you take out the muck and you complete the ring of the invert. Pipe roof is coming till what level? Is it coming down to the springing level?
Sir, pipe roofing, that pipe roofing has been done at ground level. That is, and almost 12 meter pipe roofing has been done, 12 meter. And out of that 12 meter, sir, 12 meter done. And actually we had planned to do another 15 meter if we go ahead. After, since 12 meter pipe roofing has been done, and actually we had thought that after taking 2 blasts of 1.5 meter each, means after 3 meter, when 9 meter will be in our hand, then we will do another pipe roofing. But presently we are unable to go ahead in such a scenario.
Actually, in this scenario, you will have to keep closing the ring, which means that, what you have to do is just go by 1 meter, put a support core there, do face this thing bolting as well along the face direction. There are fiber reinforced bolts available, easy to cut nowadays, fiberglass bolts. And for every that 1 meter round, you have to close the ring below. So you'll have to cut 1 meter and do a complete ring below. So you'll have to put a lattice girder even at the invert and connect it to your pipe roof or other supports on the top. Even if they are passive supports, if they are ribs, the ribs should then start forming a complete circle at the bottom using lattice girders and shotcrete. Go meter by meter. And at all times, you will also have to have face supports in terms of these bolts going along the tunnel. And then you cut it after every 1 meter. Fiberglass bolts are easier to cut. The other bolts will need time. That's the only way to be able to do it under that pipe roof. Because if you remove more than 0.75 meters or 1 meter, the whole muck, if you remove without doing the complete ring, then that ground will not hold. It will immediately collapse. So you'll have to see if that completing that ring helps you and allows you to go a meter each. Otherwise, the best would be how much. This is at what location in the tunnel? How much more tunneling to do ahead of this?
Pardon, sir?
This is at what chainage in the tunnel? What RD?
Sir, Chennai is 527 meter. This and
Oh,
this
just
this is
5 meters.
527 meter.
Okay, okay. So it is just in the beginning of the tunnel itself.
Yes, sir.
Right. So, and I'm sure in those areas, because it will be close to the ridge, no way to do a adit or a shaft from somewhere to get ahead of this area.
Pardon, sir. Your voice is not clear. Pardon, sir.
I said, is there a possibility of a side adit to come ahead of this area?
Definitely, sir. Actually, there is an edit known as edit 2. From that
Okay.
edit 2, we have entered to that HRT, and basically there is another HRT which is parallel to it, and the lateral cover is 40 meter. So same situation has also this HRT. Its phase it is known as phase 3B, and parallel to it there is a phase, namely phase 3A. So same situation has also occurred in phase 3A.
Okay.
But actually we are just tackling only this phase, and we are doing consortium routing also in phase 3A. But no forepolling and has been done in this phase, as we are thinking that after resolving this issue, we will tackle that phase 3A.
So grouting per se is not likely to help too much. Pipe proofing, and you'll have to get the pipe proof right till the springing level and do it inward. You have to close that ring. Every 1 meter that ring will have to be closed.
Sir, actually 300 mm, that is the spacing between two the ring, that is 300 mm. We have kept the pipe proofing at 300 mm spacing. 300 mm.
No, I am saying spacing along the tunnel. So what happens is, for every round, you should go say half a meter inside, take out muck only for half a meter, and make a ring which should connect on your pipe roof on the top. A complete ring should be formed. So ring by ring, you'll have to go ahead.
Yeah, ring by
Because
ring.
only that circular ring will give you. Yeah. Otherwise, if we don't do the complete circular ring, we will not get that, geomechanical stability.
Okay.
Because you're almost on a horseshoe or a only on the heading thing. There are too much of stress concentration. So there are too many stress concentrations on the edges. You have to make it a full circle, so that tensile stresses are lesser, and that will really help the strength. And I'm only telling you without seeing the sites, sir. Sometimes sites are very different. These things happen. I know that probably what I'm saying is kabhi theoretical ho jata hai, but closing the ring is very important. Is very important. And pipe jacking, sir, still ask you there, sir. If pipe jacking can be done, that can help in such areas.
Sir, your one session is pipe jacking, another is by closing the rings. We can do it.
Closing the ring, sir. Temporary inverts should be formed, sir, and rings should be closed.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
आवाज आ रही है मेरी?
Yes, you're audible, please.
Do we have more questions?
Okay, what I can do?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, what I can do is, since we have time and there don't seem to be many more questions, we can also talk about tunnel boring machines. I think that is something that we've not touched here, right? Design aspects, I could go into details, but I've covered enough of them. See, all of us work with tunnel boring machines. I have seen one in Parvati project, which is stuck. I don't know if it started moving again. Shad, you people would be would know about it. So, tunnel boring machines are of 3 to 4 kinds.
It's working nowadays, sir. It's working.
Oh, it's working. So did we
Yeah.
change the machine or is it the same machine?
No, the same machine is there. They have not changed. But the progress
Okay.
is a little bit slow.
Right. See, now that particular machine is a gripper type TBM. So what it is doing is it is basically gripping on the sides, the gripping pads, and then it is getting its thrust. Now what happens in a gripper type TBM is because its thrust comes from these gripper pads, and if the rock mass is poor, then the gripper pads tend to actually push and punch the rock. And also because it will punch the rock, we can't generate too much of traction. So these machines can't give you too much of traction, and that is why the pace is slower. So one type of tunnel boring machine is a gripper type machine, which takes its traction from these gripper pads. Right now, what we all need to understand is what kind of machine should be used for what kind of things. So a machine in poor rock should generally be a shield type machine, wherein there is a double shield machine wherein the complete shield is used to grip the area around it. Because it has got more surface area, it can generate more friction and hence more traction. And then the cutter head ahead is under another shield, and the cutter head gets traction and it cuts, and piche se the segments keep coming. So what happens is sometimes because of poor selection of the machine, the TBMs are not able to work. Now in this particular case also, because of the gripper pads being just those two areas for contact, that machine can't generate too much of traction for cutting, and hence the speed is slow. Had it been a shield machine, it would have been faster. But I totally agree that this machine came into being when probably there were no shield machines in India. So but it's important to understand what kind of machines can do what. So for rock tunneling, there could be gripper machines in very good rock, then there should be shield machine, double shield machines. But in soil, what is used in metros and all, we have to have slurry machines, which are you would have heard the term open type and closed type. So open type machine is which has face pressure also. So what these machines do is they are applying a pressure on the face also, because what is happening in shallow tunneling is that the muck from ahead is also trying to come into the tunnel. It gives a face pressure and it controls that muck from coming inside. So a gripper, a earth pressure balancing machine is used in metro systems with closed mode, where it is giving out face pressure on ahead so that the muck from ahead of the machine is not coming into the tunnel, and this ensures that there is no settlement. Hence, actually in shallow tunneling, where there are buildings on top, where settlement control is required, you have to function with a TBM only. And drill and blast method will not be successful, because the moment we take the blast, for that moment we leave that area unsupported, and there is likely to be settlement on top. Right? So it's very important for us to understand that in shallow tunneling, TBM, especially earth pressure balancing machines with face pressure, is required. And a drill and blast method will not be very successful, because there is likelihood of settlements on top. And if there are building foundations on top, they are likely to collapse. Another kind of machine is a slurry machine. So what it does is, as it travels ahead, it keeps applying a bentonite slurry all around and giving stability. So as it goes ahead, it is doing a slurry, giving stability to that soil before even the segments come in and the segments are erected. So we need to understand the difference between hard rock machines, a gripper type machine, a shield type machine, and where these shallow tunneling, earth pressure balancing, or slurry machines are used. Obviously, shallow tunneling is in soil, so they need bentonite slurries, they need face pressure, they need to have settlement control because they're generally in urban areas. So this is something that a lot of us, because all of us keep working in mountains more than anywhere else, we don't tend to understand. So TBMs today also are developing really fast, and if we have good TBMs with a good exploration program, then even TBMs can succeed. The only issue is that administratively TBMs will need a finite amount of, say, power. So if you are in a very remote area, how do you give it that power for running the machine? Then these cutter heads, they can be right up to 25, 30 tons of weight. How do you get those cutter heads there at those sites? So we have to see mobilizing the machine up to a site like that and giving it power. But if we can do that, today machines are evolving where these machines can also work in heterogeneous ground. They are mixed kind of machines which also have a auger, which have a shield. So in poor ground conditions, the auger can come into play. They can use the bentonite, cross that, and then the shield comes into play again. It takes time to change it into multi-mode, but those machines are evolving. So, unlike what was there 5 years back, we should not write off TBMs for tunneling in the Himalayas, but we should have a very robust exploration program which needs to be given to these TBM manufacturers for them to suggest a good TBM, and that should become part of the DPR itself. Because if we do not get the inputs from the industry during the DPR stage, then it becomes difficult for these TBM machineries to be inducted by a client because they are not catered for in the DPR. And the DPR is not made around the requirements of that TBM. So we need to slightly open up on that part also, because where TBMs are successful, they give good progress. Shallow tunnels, metros, and all are all TBMs. Except for cross passages and shafts, they are using TBMs only. And obviously the advantage being that even if that TBM gets stuck somewhere, the TBM can be taken out with a shaft. It's a shallow shaft. You do a shaft, you take out the cutter head, do some drill and blast, and then you introduce the TBM on the rail again, and it goes ahead. So that advantage is there with with shallow tunneling. And I hope most of you do understand why do we call TBMs a one-way machine. So I'll take you back to that one graph that I was trying to show you earlier. So what happens is when we reach up the excavation phase and we are standing there, after we take a blast, since the rock has moved ahead of it, this particular phase converges. And when the blast phase goes even more ahead, it converges more. So on that graph, on that image we were seeing, I'll try and share that image. Wait. Uh, so what you see is that what we are seeing on the top left is the excavation phase. Behind it is the deformation. So the deformations are more away from the face because the face support has gone. Now, what happens with the TBM is when the TBM is standing there, it is giving face support, and hence ahead of the excavation phase, there is no deformation and there is no sinking. Now, when the TBM goes ahead and there are deformations behind, in case there are too many deformations, this cutter head is of a certain dimension and the teeth of the cutter head are on the front. So there is no way for this machine to come back. Now, in shallow tunneling, when this gets stuck, we can still take it out with a shaft or an adit. But in deep tunnels, if this happens, then the only way to take it out is to go behind somewhere, do a drill and blast tunnel, come ahead, find where the cutter head is, try and take it out, probably do a bigger opening and then push the machine ahead. But pushing machines ahead itself is not very easy. So that is why if we do not know the geology very well, then working with tunnel boring machines in the hills becomes cumbersome. But if we know geology well and there is a finite continuous geology, in that kind of a condition, we can ensure that TBMs can also work. And we should not close our ideas to TBMs in the Himalayas anymore. But then we should try and get them in the at the DPR stage. We should communicate with the industry, ask the TBM manufacturers what kind of TBMs are available, and ensure that kind of an input is made available to them so that they can help us use the TBMs. Any more questions from the sites, please? Anything which is bothering you at the site, even if it is contractual?
Sir, I have a question.
Please.
Sir, it would be better if you make a comparison between drilling blasting method DBM, TBM, and road header, TBM, and drilling blasting method.
Road headers per se are used only for very small work. You understand these road headers are just bobs with bits on top. So the pace of work is very slow. So they can be used for, underpasses and things like that, and probably only for some kind of a cross passage if that is also not time critical. So comparing a road header to any of these machines, because road headers are meant only for very small projects, and the road header has the maximum capacity to go up to 120 MPa. Beyond
generally, we
120
people are using
MPa
into
of
mining, sir.
uniaction.
Sorry to interrupt you.
So yes, but mining, you're extracting the ore. But
Yes,
your
that is why
idea
we
is
are
not
using
to
road
come
header
from
there. Yes.
place A to place B and get out, right? So that in that condition where your ore is important, probably that pace is acceptable. But in tunneling, in communication tunnels and in hydro tunnels, you need to get across. So that pace can't be matched. That
But
pace
sir,
cannot be matched.
in one of our projects, that is Subansiri Lower project, which is in Assam and at the border of Assam and Arunachal. Actually, there is a project, Subansiri Lower project of 2000 megawatt. Road header is being used in that area, and the rock type is sandstone.
It's
being
it's soft rock,
excavated with the help
30
of
MPa, 40 MPa. But tell me, can you match the speed that you get a road header from either drill and blast or a tunnel boring machine? In a sandstone, tunnel boring machine can give you up to 30 meters in a day.
Sir, what my intention was to ask means, what are the pros and cons of these three types of?
See, I'll tell you, initial cost of a road header is low. In soft material, less than 120 MPa is suitable, but the pace of work is very slow when compared to drill and blast and tunnel boring machines. So, when time critical activities are there, I would suggest it shouldn't be used for too long a structure. In my understanding, in my whatever I know and I've seen the other sites, probably road headers are used for nothing more than 150 meters of tunneling, or cross passages or underpasses. Beyond that, people will then go for conventional ways of either using drill and blast or tunnel boring machines. Tunnel boring machines, definitely the initial cost is high, but in case the geology is helpful, then it is a faster and a more mechanized way. Labor requirements are lesser. So tunnel boring machines have their own advantages. That's why metro systems have been using them. They're a much faster way of functioning. In mixed homogeneous ground, tunnel boring machines even today have that slight amount of a question mark, but now slowly they are also developing into these hybrid machines and all, where they say, they claim that within a month they can change from one mode to the other. Though 1 month also is quite a time, but they claim that earlier it was not possible at all. Drill and blast with NATM gives you the flexibility to work in any kind of strata. And overall, if you see the finances, per meter tunneling in drill and blast is cheaper than tunnel boring machines. I would actually not know the economics of a road header because I've never analyzed it. But the economics of a drill and blast method always turn out cheaper than a tunnel boring machine, because even today in tunnel boring machines, most of our cutter heads are being imported.
Sir, then the disadvantage of DBM method is its slow pace.
See, it is slower than tunnel boring machines when tunnel boring machines are in a good strata. In shallow tunneling, TBMs are faster. Drill and blast is slower. But in deep tunneling, if you see it over the length of the project, the general experience of the world has been that drill and blast methods are at par with tunnel boring machines, if not faster. Because a lot of tunnel boring machines have had this, cases of getting stuck somewhere or the other. And when they get stuck for months together. So then when we average out the daily rates, a drill and blast flexibility helps it. So
then it is better to use DBM. Then is it better to use DBM?
I personally would prefer using with observational technique. Yes. Definitely.
Okay.
But you are not allowed to use DBM at every places, taking into account the environmental consideration.
Okay, what
would be the
environmental consideration?
Definitely. For example, in Parvati 2, TBM was installed because no environmental clearance was not provided for drilling and blast method. That's why TBM was installed. So at every place you cannot use drilling and blast method. In that situation, and in addition to that, there are some other factors also which compel you to use TBM rather than DBM.
Correct.
So I agree to your point. Where because of probably the explosive waves and all, we are told not to use. But honestly speaking, sir, even in blasting today, with using the correct delay sequences and using the correct amount of explosives and all, we can do an analysis and we can ensure that our S waves don't travel after a certain distance. So that is very much possible. But tell me, sir, even in Parvati, the other projects around it were using drill and blast. So how come only for this they said ki no isme nahi karna? But could have been, I am not too sure. But anyway, sir, even with drill and blast, doing that control of P and S waves is possible by using the right amount of explosives, and then obviously it becomes slightly slower because your amount of explosive per blast will have to be reduced, but can be done. But certain places where there is too heterogeneous a ground, then वहाँ पे TBMs cannot be used. It will be very cumbersome to use them.
Correct.
Like if in Rohtang we were stuck with the TBM, sir, we would be stuck even today. How do you take it out? You are 600 meters inside, about 500 meters of overburden. There's no way to even pull it out.
Yes.
So TBMs do definitely have a limiting factor. But yes, you're right that some people would not allow drilling. And as I said, sir, in shallow tunneling, these boring machines are very successful. And we must go ahead and use them. And also in good rock, shield TBMs are very good. If we are sure, like probably 50 years back in the Konkan region, we would have used TBMs. Basaltic rock. They would have been faster than what was done that time. I believe in irrigation projects in down south, they're still using them, sir. Now they are using them, even when there are slightly deep tunnels. So, any more questions?
Sir, one question was there. How to take care of high ingress of water during tunneling?
Perfect. Though this is the subject of tomorrow, somebody is covering injection grouts, because the best way to do point treatment would be injection grouting. But the way to handle water, first of all, is to understand as to what you want to do with the water. See, a fully tanked section, which means a complete section which has water all around, you always have hydrostatic pressure. So whatever we do with the water, finally we have to find out a way for it to get into our drainage system and probably go out of the portal locations. If we try and trap it, then it will come out at one or the other point in the tunnel. So the first principle should be to find the path for that water as to where we can take it out. Now to do that, the best way is that what we were doing in Rohtang also is that we would grout microfine, we do microfine cement grouting on one portion of our heading, you know, on on one
Yes.
half of the face, so that the water would get diverted to the other half. We would go in here, you know, and then keep moving it around left and right. And in the meantime, whatever water was coming was brought down into the construction drain and taken out of the portal. Subsequently, there were these channels which were made, which got the water down to the side drains and the main final drain, and the water kept flowing out of there. So the water continued to flow through dimple membranes, through some of these sheets and channels into the main drain, and then went out, except for the Serinala portion where we had complete waterproofing. However, in countries like Austria, even if your tunnel is bone dry, they do waterproofing, and they don't do a full waterproofing. At the invert also, they do something called the umbrella type waterproofing, wherein the water is kept behind the waterproofing membrane, goes down into the slotted drains on the sides, and from that it goes into the manholes, and then it is taken out.
Okay.
And over that comes the arch lining gantry. But how to treat water would be injection grouting, you know, start grouting from one end so that the water is diverted to a specific place, and from there to drain it out. Try and
Thank you
plugging
very much.
water really doesn't work.
Okay.
Sorry, could you say?
Anyway, I'll also discuss one more thing with you people, because I'm sure that the hydro tunnels are also getting lined. Most of them do get lined as well, and the other tunnels also. So NATM has this philosophy wherein it says that all the load is actually taken only by the primary support, which is your shotcrete and your rock bolts, and the final lining should come up only after all the deformations have ceased. The general deformation value is 4 mm in a month, which means that there is no deformation happening in the tunnel at all. Only after that final lining comes, which means actually the final lining of the tunnel, the concrete lining, is not supposed to take load, except for in swelling or squeezing ground where it is reinforced, so that at a later time, if there is some load coming, it can take some load. Otherwise, final lining in new NATM kind of tunneling is not supposed to take load. The thickness is decided only based on the envisaged fire load. Because say about 400 mm, 300 to 400 mm can give you 2.5 hours, or 2.5 hours of a time before it actually starts falling and falling down. And within that time, we should be able to get in our firefighting resources and douse the fire. So that is how this 300 to 250 to 300, 350 mm of lining is designed for 30 megawatts fire load. And it is not for the load of the rock mass. Final lining is to be done after the rock mass has stabilized and there are no deformations. That probably I missed out when we were discussing the part in the morning, so I thought I'd cover that.
Yes.
Okay, is that all? Parikshit, have we finished?
Yes, sir. Sir, I've finished. Sir.
Okay, so well, if there are no more questions now, can we conclude this subject? Shall we conclude it now? Okay. Right, ladies and gentlemen. First, that tunneling is one of the major challenges, and at the same time, most interesting facet of civil engineering in a professional journey. I got associated with the tunneling at a very late stage in career, and as I'm going, I've actually virtually become a student of tunneling. You know, the tunnel engineering rather. I don't call it any longer tunnel engineering. I call it underground space. It's fascinating. More you learn, more you explore, more you realize that there is another world waiting for us to explore now. We've done enough with the high rise. We've done enough with the overground. I think for people who are connected with the underground world, these are very, very fascinating times. Okay, now when we summarize, you know, when we talk about, okay, if I use the permit, if you permit me to use the word tunnel again, we are connected with the highway tunnels, we are connected with the railway tunnels, we are connected with the metro tunnels, and we are also connected with the hydro tunnels. That is, most of you are associated, and each one has its own peculiar circumstances. Okay, so we'll not get into that. Like say, when you say highway tunnel, you're more worried about the safety, more concerned with the ventilation, with the lighting, and the other things. Similarly, railway tunnels, in addition to all that, you're also worried about the high-speed railway systems, acoustics. Yeah, metro has its own nuances, and in the case of hydro, the biggest challenge today is that, okay, you are invariably working in the inaccessible areas. That's the moot point. So issue came up, which method to use? Well, it's a decision which has to be taken in advance, not as we evolve. Okay, but it happens. Even in case of Rohtang, it happened. Methodology had to be changed midway through. Not when we had started, but when we were about to start. There is a history to it. Well, coming back to, there was a very interesting question, you know, whether we should go in for tunnel boring or we should go and drill and blast. Well, if you are into a very conventional kind of a mindset, drill and blast is the safest, slow, but sure way of reaching it. And more successful in Himalayas, the simple reason that TBM is evolving today, both in terms of dia and in terms of complexities. I think the speaker has mentioned about it that, okay, in case of a mixed rock, where multiple cutter head would be required, so they have already taken care that, okay, even in a mixed rock system, there are tunnel boring machines available today. But you have to make the data available to the manufacturer so that he can cater for it in advance, not when you meet up with the situation. That's very difficult. But more often than not, why we do not prefer to use in the mountains, especially in case of Himalayas, is that chances are that, okay, the machine will probably find a problem. What do you do? Firstly, the length of the machine itself is so long. The dia of the machine can become huge. These days, you know that, okay, every day they're adding meters. So firstly, logistics is a problem, that how do you carry such heavy equipment to the remote locations that you have? The second is, even if you manage to carry, and even if you manage to launch, should something go wrong, how will you extricate it? When you reach a length of 2 kilometers inside, 3, 5, 6 kilometers inside, retrieving it is impossible. You have to cut a shaft. Now, cutting a shaft with an overburden of 500 meters, well, I think it's not. It'll take a couple of years, and that's why I think normally it's not a preferred methodology, at least for the time being. Okay. You know, I'll go to a small example. Other day, we were invited to do some brainstorming with the NHDCL, you know, that Highway Infrastructure Development Corporation. They are doing Zojila Tunnel, famous Zojila Tunnel. Now, other day, I think Honorable Minister had been there, and he wants them to sort of, I won't say hasten the process, but then go on a little fast track. So they were now brainstorming that, is there a case in point that, okay, by making a shaft midway, can we get another attack point where we can start working at 2 sites simultaneously? Well, I think doable, but it turns out to be that if they make a vertical shaft, it will be 470 meters deep. So how do you make it? and they're looking at one season. Now 470 meters, even a horizontal, I wouldn't say shaft, but a horizontal tunnel is an extremely difficult target to achieve. Vertical. So when we were querying them that what methodology are going to use, but I'm sorry to say, I think there was something in terms of we will put a couple of excavators and keep going down. So I asked them the simple question that, okay, 20, 30, 40, 50 meters, you'll go down. You'll do the muck removal also. But when you reach a depth of 200 meters, which machine? And how will you do the muck removal? Because the biggest trouble today is, it's not that cutting is fine, but removing what you cut, how will you do it? It can't be mechanized the way they are thinking. So we were brainstorming, yes. Is there a methodology? Has it been used? Yes. HerrickNet is gone on record that they have done a vertical shaft up to 80 meters using something called the vertical shaft sinking machine, which is tried, tested. They can do it. But when you ask them, when you tell them the problem, I'm sure they will come up with a solution. Only to my way of looking at it in a very simple way is that they will have to use a multi-stage method where they can do it up to 80 meters, create some kind of a staging system, go another 80 meters, and then probably keep going down as the depth increases. But then they have their own systems of the muck removal. And then, of course, the issue came up that, okay, can we work during the winters? Well, winter working in these areas, snowbound areas, is a problem. Well, there is a methodology. You make snow galleries on top so that the snow accumulation happens and slides it off, and it keeps the working site clear of snow. But then there's sub-zero temperatures. Will your machines work? Well, in that case, you have to tell the machine manufacturer that, look, I'm going to operate these machines in sub-zero conditions. So I come to the point that all these things now you can't think midway when you are already into it. You have to think of it much in advance. This is the job of the planners. Okay, and hence the DPR. I think the speaker, Richard Mehra, mentioned about the DPR, that all these eventualities have to be covered in your DPRs. And my advice to everybody would be that since we are working in the government system, it's very difficult to change if the issue has not been catered for in the DPR. I will share another example. Other day, when I was actually working till some time back, I was working in a design and consultancy firm. We were to do underwater design. It is you know that, okay, under river Brahmaputra. The two things which came to my mind was, one is that, okay, you are doing something underwater. The water ingress, the incident of water ingress is much more likely than anywhere else. So I said, what kind of waterproofing have you now catered for? We have to have some kind of specialized waterproofing. Have we catered for it? I said, no, just don't depend on the membrane kind of a thing. It may work, it may not work. So, okay, no, there is a crystalline technology. Maybe there is yet another, don't mention the company, but in the DPR, give that flexibility to the operator that he can use one of these techniques. Tomorrow, you can't suddenly spring a surprise. The DPR mein to likha membrane, or wo karna chahta hai crystalline. Then how do you know? So this is what it is, that it is very to facilitate the hands of the engineers at a later stage to draft these in as a part of the conditions of contract. I think all these things, that's why it's a reverse engineering. Okay, invariably we come up with when you all are dealing with I'm sure you all are very experienced people. You all have dealt with more than one contractual issue, the huge number of contractual issues, and worldwide. And invariably they come up that the tunnel engineering is the most challenging because the unforeseen can be many more than elsewhere. Well, you know that how we do investigations in our country. That's a subject of discussion tomorrow. I'm not going to touch that. But then poor investigation, but it's not, you can't blame it on investigation also every time. There will be surprises. Like Rohtang, we say surprise. It was not a surprise, but it was a shock. It took 2 years. Now that is not a marvel of engineering. Whoever did the investigation has failed. It took us 2 years, 2 precious years to do it. For a lot of money. So at the investigation stage, I know exactly, I will not share it with you, but it was not a good investigation done. Okay, and people who are dealing with it know that this probably could have been thought of. I'm not saying avoid it, but this could have been thought of. Solutions could have been thought of rather than waiting and wasting 2 crucial years. Now, issue came up about that. How do you carry it? Gentlemen, I mentioned it again in the passing that you all are working in very, very remote areas. We do not invest a penny in the logistics. Indian mindset. And I will say NHPC wants to use the existing roads. You want to use the existing bridges. Half of the roads and half of the bridges get spoiled during your construction phase. At best, you may offer that we will strengthen some bridges to take our machinery across. We may strengthen some roads. Now, this is part of the logistic planning. In India, this is missing. Because if we consider logistics, it will add to cost. Cost means ज़्यादा पैसा government sanction नहीं करेगी. Now, this is a very, very, I would say, very primitive way of looking at things. You have to make some investment to avoid the degradation to the existing infrastructure. एक ही रोड है, उसी को आपकी मशीन भी यूज करेंगी और अगर उस रोड के ऊपर मशीन गिर गई, मशीन तो निकलेगी भी नहीं, वो रोड भी गई, 2 महीने के लिए रोड ब्लॉक, ब्रिज टूट गया, local will face that. We've had in Rohtang, we had, of course, that bridge was dedicated to Rohtang tunnel, but we had 2 failures. The bridge only got washed a bit, it broke. It was a simple Bailey bridge. So again, something, please think through these things. Please think of logistics, labor camps, safe labor camps, snow clearance, okay, movement on the road, creating some temporary infrastructure, which should not be so temporary also that it creates into accident. Loss of life can happen. So all these things have to be, just see what is happening in Uttarakhand. Every third day we hear of, okay, some of you may have been involved in that. And the later stage we realize that, is this the best way that we could have afforded our safety engineering? Well, I think our safety standards itself is a question mark. Safety, very, very important, loss of life. So what's the point, all your life you will not probably, sleep in peace if you ever headed up in a situation like this. So there are a number of issues. I will not get involved as a separate subject by itself. You all can do that. Sufficient to say that today's subject, I think, was very well covered. Starting from the rock mechanics, in one day, we can only do this much justice and not that teach the entire engineering here, but very, very, methodologically, he's proceeded to explain to us the basic nuances of the rock mechanics, the rock form and the rock type, and all the associated as to how to go about it. There are different techniques, there are different methodologies which are to be used. And somebody asked me, not me, asked the speaker, I think he gave a correct answer, that each site will always have, you can apply any amount of engineering, but each site will have its own site-specific challenges, which you will have to resolve. Okay, no one size will fit all. Okay, there will be challenges, and that's why people like you, such educated people, such experienced people are there. So, and having done that in the part 1 of the session, part 2 was the design part of it, and I'm glad since he had some spare time, he also took some basic questions on the TBM part, which is very fascinating. TBMs are evolving, but TBM is not the ultimate, and even when you go back to Europe, I know the old days there, when the experienced people there, they talk less of TBM, they talk more of drill and blast. They talk more of NATM. And they talk very little of the TBM. There is a separate set of people who only talk of TBMs now. But China, for example, in a big way has switched over to TBMs. Another thing which I will caution you in India, most of the machines, unless you put it as a condition of contract that you will use a new machine, given a choice, our contractors being what they are, they'll bring in the refurbished machines. Okay. Which you might say a new machine is a new machine and a refurb. This is a whole new industry. Refurbished TBMs is a huge industry, and they found no better user than India. So that's why if you go into the genesis of problems here, 50% of it can be assigned to the machine giving a problem because it is a second-hand machine. It's a used machine. No amount of refurbishment can create a new machine. There have been challenges. But fortunately, these have been employed in metros which are very shallow, 15 to 20 meters of depth. So quickly you can make a shaft, take it out, and launch another one. So they can. But if you land up in a situation in Himalayas where you've gone 5 kilometers inside, you don't know. Or overburden to 1 kilometer. No, you're stuck. You're stuck there forever. You can't take it out, and you can't even drill a hole. So that's why I think there are a number of issues. In such a given time frame, we can't really summarize everything, but it's interesting. It's interesting the way your seminar or your webinar is developing. More so, tomorrow you have 4 more subjects being covered. You have a geological investigation by Rana. He's very good at it. Environmental, some of the environmental methodologies. Fiber reinforced concrete is being spoken about, and the ground improvement and support system. Yeah, two things which you're going to find out tomorrow is the way. And please ask questions. Ground improvement. There are a number of ways that to do it, and the support system. Some questions came up, and Colonel Mehra did mention that reserve these questions for tomorrow because you have a full-fledged lecture coming on the support systems. So that's it for today. Thank you very much for being very patient audience. And that's it. And thank you, Parikshit, once again. I think you've taken through the journey of two important issues very, very, I would say, comfortably, very collaboratively. And ladies and gentlemen, feel free. You must interact. And you can take the addresses, the email IDs of the speakers, write to them, write to us. We will try and help you out, at least reaching out to these people and seeking some advice. I will not say solutions. These people in 1 minute cannot give you solutions. They can advise you. Solutions you'll have to develop along with your teams and with your consultants and all. And that's it. We will not spend any more time on this. Thank you once again. God bless you all. Thank you, Parikshit. Wonderfully done. Very well conducted.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much,
Thank you,
sir.
sir, for your thoughtful remarks. Thank you to the
No, no,
speaker.
no. Oh, we are one. We are one. In India, we are one fraternity now. I personally want to see this underground space fraternity, the tunneling fraternity, really growing and interacting. Okay, and making a mark not in the country, even abroad. When we go for the ITA, I remember 3 or 4 times I have been there. I see a sea change now. From the first time when we had gone, we were nowhere. And now when we go there as a homogeneous body of 40 to 50 professionals from India, our word matters. Okay, that's the way to go forward. Not that the word matters. Now there are professionals who are now growing in this field. Earlier we were dependent on outside consultants, outside contractors. We still are dependent, but it's high time that you all grow both academically, go both from the research and design, and also as practitioners, take challenges, deal with more machines, deal with more situations, and God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hope to see all the participants tomorrow morning, 1100 hours. Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, madam.